Alright guys, hello everybody. Hope you're all doing well. You know, there are just some days where I just kind of think to myself, you know, just what is the point? What is the point of it all? What's the point in trying when you've been through it all before, of the disappointments and disillusionment with people and jobs, society in general, politics, relationships, friends, family. You know, there are just some days I wake up and I just think, you know, why did I get up this morning? You know, why am I bothering to even get out of bed? You know, and I don't just mean just because I'm depressed, but just as a kind of existential kind of crisis type thing, really. You know, just thinking to myself, you know, what's the point? You know, why do I bother with anything? You know, why bother brushing my teeth? Why bother even getting a shower? Why bother even just continue to just go on when you know, there's just times where you just think to yourself, you know, I just can't see a way forward. I can't see a path. I can't see any light. I can't see any hope. And I don't necessarily mean that, you know, I don't mean that I'm suicidal, or that I'm, you know, just completely throwing in the towel. But I'm just saying that there are just some days where you just think to yourself, you know, I'm just tired, man. Really fucking exhausted. I'm tired of trying. I'm tired of keeping up a brave face all the time and forcing myself to smile and laugh, and forcing myself to try and fit in with everybody else, to make everybody else feel comfortable, fitting into society's norms and expectations of you as a man in his 30s or whatever age you are. You know, just constant, never-ending pressure to be seen as strong and independent, self-reliant, you know, someone that's got his life together. You know, being assertive. And, you know, just life just kind of gets a bit tiring after a while. You know, life kind of just gets a bit boring, and you know, I just think sometimes you just think to yourself, you know, why did I wake up this morning? Why bother? Why do I continue to live this life that doesn't bring me any happiness, that doesn't bring me any satisfaction anymore? And you know, it just gets tiring. It's tiring to be yourself. It's tiring to just constantly be, you know, just always having to try and like maintain this sense that everything's fine, everything's okay in the world, and you know, I'm a happy-go-lucky, positive person, and I just think that, you know, the problem is that we, you know, we're expected to buy into this like model that everyone has to be super buoyant and super extroverted and super confident all the time, and I think it's just, yeah, I just think that stuff makes people really deeply miserable, because you're not allowed to be your natural self. And I don't want to fit in. I don't want to be something that I'm not. I don't want to put on a face. I don't want to put on a front for other people's benefits, because it's what they like. It's what they want. It's what they need. Fuck those people. What about what I want from time to time? What about what I need? What about what I'm going through? And I don't say this as a selfish individual, or someone that's got a chip on his shoulder, or someone that's got a victim, someone that's playing the victim or something. I don't mean it in that way. I just mean that, it just seems to me that a lot of the time that society is just very lopsided. It's very, it's aimed at those that want to play the game and are willing to play by the rules, to, or rather sometimes not play by the rules to do certain things. And I just don't really want to be that. I don't really want to, I just don't want to be a part of the system, to be honest. But at the same time, to some extent you have to be, because otherwise you end up on the streets. You end up in a prison. You end up dying of hunger. With no bank account. You end up in a life caught up in a spiral of abuse and drugs but then again, having said that, you can end up in those situations even when you are someone that's trying their best to. So I guess my point is that it's just there's no real sense of fairness in this world, in my opinion. There's no real true sense of morality or justice, I don't think. It's just, as we've seen with the recent Charlie Kirk assassination, God bless his soul, and my heart goes out to his wife and his kids, obviously, and his overall family and friends, America overall, really, probably even just the Western world, because I think it's this has ramifications for the in many ways a lot of the Western world, I believe. So supposedly civilized, sophisticated parts of the world that understand why certain principles and values that America's tried to keep a hold of for the most part, although I'm not saying it's perfect, why they're under threat, and why people like Charlie Kirk were trying to warn the world really about the ills of radical ideologues, and on the left at least, and the alliance of the left and Islam. I don't want to make this into a political thing, but he was killed because he was saying things that could potentially threaten and influence people to change the system, really. And it just tells me that when people resort to censorship, degrading people, insulting people, ruining people's lives, getting them cancelled, or having people assassinated, you know that there is a deep rot somewhere in your society that's been festering for a very long time, and it's something has gone terribly wrong in America and in my own country in the UK, and certainly since the 90s, I think, but a lot of it stems right back to probably to the 60s, really. The so-called liberalism movement and feminism and all that kind of stuff. And while I think like people's intentions probably were good at first, I just think that movements got radicalized and they got weaponized, politicized. But anyway, I don't really want to make this into a whole kind of spiel about that kind of stuff, because I don't really want to go on about that stuff, because it's I don't think this is really the right time to be going on about that kind of stuff, really. But I just want to just say that, and like a lot of other people have already done, my rest in peace to the man. By all accounts, a great man. Admittedly, I didn't really know too much about him until obviously all of the news came up and everything. But I mean, it's just brutal, absolutely just ruthless. I just sometimes I just don't even know what you say, really. I don't know what to say. I don't even know how to express like how I feel about these kinds of things. And it was we only when was it? Just a few months ago, or when, I can't remember exactly what it was, when they had the failed assassination of Trump, and it just seems to me that these things are becoming more common, and I really do fear that we are losing a grip on morality, on things that we've spent decades and centuries trying to build up. People that died in wars, fighting for these kinds of things, and I just find it incredibly sad. Really, I genuinely do. I just think it's really. I mean, it is fucking depressing, man, what's happened in the West of the last few decades. I mean, it's just... But, going back to what I said at the beginning about sometimes not knowing, whether to go on in life, or feeling like you don't want to go on in life sometimes, If there was ever a reason to go on, I suppose, it's for things like that. It's for this. It's not even for yourself. It's for the generations that will come after us. My generation. We'll be lucky if we've got another 30, 40 years left. 50 maybe at the most, if we're lucky. And we do have to start asking serious questions about the direction of where we're going, I think, and how we're going to tackle things and how we're going to prevent unrest, because I think we're starting to see civility breaking down, and it's just really sad, man. It's really, really sad to see all of this stuff. I follow the news, I follow stuff on social media, and certainly since 2016, I really just fear that the world's been getting worse, much, much worse since then. Because I think, well, when I look back to debates on mainstream news channels of political opponents, debating controversial issues. I mean, even just until relatively recently, and obviously for the most part, most people are civilized, but I've started to sort of see a lot more of this kind of very immature, very unprofessional, almost childlike kind of immature, very petty point scoring, egos battling it out kind of thing in a lot of debates, whether it's political debates, issues around society, culture, whatever it is. And it's always about, I've got to be right, I have to be right, rather than it being about the actual truth, proving what's true as best as you possibly can, And I understand that people are passionate about their own beliefs and for what in all sorts of different areas of their lives, you know, their own opinions about their society, about their culture, about how things happen in whether it's to do with the law, you know, whether it's to do with the way that authorities run things, whatever it might be, crime, you know, politics, gender-related issues, whatever, you know, identity politics, all that kind of crap, woke ideology stuff. You know, it's okay for people to have their own opinions. It's okay for people to be passionate about their own opinions. And you know, but it's, I think we have to, you know, we're seriously we are in a very, very, very dangerous place, I believe. And I think that we have to somehow get back to the principles of debate and civil discourse that we used to have a lot more of. Because, you know, it's difficult. I understand that people are very defensive and people are very protective of their own biases and their own views and their own feelings and opinions, because I am as well. I'm a human being just like everybody else. I understand that. But I think what we have to bring back as a way of being respectful is disagreeing with each other in a respectful manner, you know. Because I think just because you don't, you know, you can have passionate debates and disagreements with people, but you know, the vast majority of people out there don't resort to violence, don't resort to, you know, trying to demonize, stigmatize, ostracize, you know, destroy someone's life in some way or other because of it. You know, most people will, you know, you might, you know, it's, you know, even if you just said that, you know, it's even if the odd insult was thrown here and there, I think if it was done in a kind of, you know, there's a certain way of disagreeing with people. There's even a certain way of insulting people, you know, that you can kind of look past to a point. But you know, really ideally, you know, we should be being respectful, and we should, you know, we should be trying to find common ground. Really, you know, that's the problem, is that we're so deeply divided that we're right, no, we're right, we are right, no, we're right about this. Whereas there just doesn't seem to be much of an incentive for people to want to come together and like find some, you know, mutual agreements, or find some kind of compromise somewhere, you know, find the things that you do have in common, you know, work towards solutions to things, instead of it always being about like just endless negativity all the time, you know. Just always negative. It's always just things just spiraling out of control into, you know, it's you know, you just have to, you know, any just about any disagreement these days, you know, from all levels of society, from all different types of people. Yes, you know, it's never far away before, you know, the swearing comes out, the insults come out, the name calling comes out, the labelling comes out, you know, people dragging stuff up from people's pasts, etc., etc. And you know, this is partly one of the reasons, just as a side point here, you know, this is partly one of the reasons why I stopped getting involved in certain things online, you know, and certain, like, commenting on certain videos on YouTube, commenting on certain things on Facebook or on Reddit posts, because it just became a battle of, you know, climbing the ego hierarchical ladder kind of thing. You know, who's got the biggest dick, who's got the biggest balls kind of thing, you know, who's got the, you know, most bravado to say the most controversial things, or the most, you know, unpopular and savoury kind of thing, whatever. It's just, I don't know, sometimes I just think that the species is a bit kind of screwed, really, to be honest. And you know, I don't want that to be the case, but I don't know. Sometimes I just don't. I can't see. I just can't see how people are gonna change, really. I mean, it's just really, really sad. This is, any time really anybody's assassinated for the, even if it's somebody you passionately disagree with, it's like, I would never ever ever support anybody killing another human being because of their views, unless those people were, causing genocide or doing, absolutely horrific things. Then obviously that's a different thing. But I mean, I'm just talking about people being civilized, but having deeply ingrained, beliefs and thoughts, feelings about whatever, about things that I don't like or I disagree with for whatever reasons. But I would never ever ever support or condone violence towards those people. Never. I might not like that person. I might not like hearing what they have to say. I might even not want to watch those people. For all intents and purposes, that person doesn't exist in my world. But I certainly don't want that person to be killed. I certainly don't want that person to end up in jail because of their views. I thought we'd been through all of this shit. We've been here, but we've already been here before. All you have to look is go through the history books and see what happens when you have people like Stalin in charge, or Mao, or Hitler, or Pol Pot, or people like that. We've seen where deeply authoritarian regimes end up. We've been here. We've been here before. How many times do people have to read the history books to learn lessons? I think it's Charles Bukowski. I think in one of his interviews said something like, after a certain point, life kind of takes on a repeat. You just start seeing the same stuff kind of going around in circles, but just in more modern forms of it, or something like that. And he's right. It just seems like to me that just societies just never truly seem to. They change, but like there's the deeply flawed aspects of human nature don't change in many respects, and this is why we keep coming back to the same problems again and again. That's why there's still so many problems around the world, because we're so self-centered, so selfish, so obsessed that the world has to revolve around us in every single aspect of our lives. That life has to be comfortable and convenient for us at every single moment, and we forget that there are billions of people on the planet. Everybody's an individual. Everyone has their own experiences and deeply held beliefs and attitudes and outlooks on life and outlooks on major topics and controversial, sometimes taboo topics, and we've got to get back to a place where we say, we've got to bring empathy back to society. We've got to bring a degree of empathy and compassion back to society, but we've also got to bring back. We need, like I said in my last video about that potential proposed policy thing, we need a firm but fair stance in our societies, in our cultures, like that there is that they can be stretched to a point, but we have boundaries, and that's the problem, is that the left, in my opinion, doesn't seem to have any boundaries anymore. I didn't really want to make this video about politics, but I just wanted to kind of get that out, really, because you know, I really do think that things are getting out of control, and that we're in a massive decline in the West. Massive deterioration. And you know, as I've repeatedly said on my channel, you know, I fear that we're likely heading towards unrest of some kind or other. You know, I don't know exactly how it'll play out, but I think, you know, if we start to see these kind of things become more common, then, as is what's happened in America, but also, you know, you know, if we start to see more terrorism incidents, you know, raping of children, I probably shouldn't have used that word, but on YouTube, but, you know, if we start to see certain trends happening again across the Western world, I do fear there will become a point where I think just all trust is going to break down, you know, all trust and respect for institutions, the authorities that are supposed to keep people safe, is going to lead to people becoming, you know, just a kind of national scale level kind of red mist type thing, you know, where people just no longer, you know, kind of care about the consequences. You know, this is where we're heading. I think, you know, where we're heading towards a potential period in history of potentially very serious unrest, of mass, civil disobedience, you know, non-compliance in whatever. I don't know. Again, I don't know how it will all happen in reality, but I imagine that a lot of it will be coming down to probably non-compliance of paying energy bills, of paying taxes, etc. And there will come a point where people will collectivise in such a large number that, you know, the authorities will feel threatened, and they will then start to use force, and that's when it will kick off. That's when the public will then see that the authorities aren't on their side, the government isn't on their side, and pretty much has never really been on their side, you know, apart from the odd decent person in government, and there aren't many of them. But, you know, this is some, you know, this is sometimes why I kind of feel what's the point? You know, as a kind of pseudo educator, you know, I see how the role of AI is taking over. You know, I see that jobs like ESL roles are going to be taken over within a few years, and that schools will essentially be full of AI assistants rather than teachers. Now, whether that takes a decade or two, I don't know, but. So I'm also seeing the rise of how AI is likely to really fuck a lot of people over. And while it will certainly create new jobs, you know, for the most part, a lot of people will find themselves at the back on unemployment line, you know, waiting to get their rations, waiting to get their welfare checks, you know. You know, what they call the universal, what's it called, the universal income. I believe that we are heading towards probably some kind of a dystopian society, and I believe that technology is going to ramp that up very quickly. We are heading towards much more authoritarianism, because even if we, you know, even if that Trump does stay in power for another few years, and, you know, the West has experienced, you know, a bit of a kind of flash in the pan populism wave potentially, you know, at some point it'll be turned around, and authoritarianism will be far worse than it is now, because they will just undo all of the things that those right-wing populist parties try to set in motion. because I think people have been corrupted. I think societies and cultures have been corrupted by communist, socialist ideologies that kind of wrap themselves in this very shallow, superficial kind of blanket of liberalism, and the role of radical Islam is being used by the left, but those in positions of power in Islam are also using the left as well. So I don't think that the left hand truly knows what the right hand is doing, but I believe probably to some extent there is some suspicion there. But they both kind of rely upon each other. They both kind of need each other for their own aims, I think, because in many ways they're actually quite similar. Authoritarian, dictatorial, they make claims about freedom and independence and liberation and all that kind of stuff, and it's just all a smokescreen. It's just outdated ideals and brainwashing theology. So I do fear for the future. I do worry about where the world is heading. I worry about my own country of England. What will the England of the next 5 to 10 years look like? What will it be like to live there? What will it feel like to exist in that country? Because the last time I was there, in 2019, it didn't feel very much like home anymore. It felt like a very different place. And I'll just leave it at that, but I think you can kind of read between the lines. But on top of all this, of course, there is obviously my own personal issues going on, my own mental health battles, very private personal problems that I don't really want to talk about because I kind of have already touched upon them before. And quite frankly, it's not really anybody else's business, to be honest. But I can just say that my life is not in a very good place. And it hasn't been for quite some time. And I think, admittedly, I've just been kind of coping, really, and just... I think to some extent, I can't say I've become defeatist, but I certainly can't say that I've become... I would say that I've become apathetic, I think, about a lot of things. But I do think very strongly that we now are in a place now in time where I believe that men are going to have to stand up and fight for what they think is right and moral, just what they believe are the right values for their society, and obviously women as well. But it may very well come down to men having to literally fight to preserve certain things, fight to get certain things back. Now, whether that fight is through the political system, whether it's through intimidation means, whether it's through protests, some of the things I've already said, or whether it comes down in the end out of pure desperation and a sense that they feel like they have no other options. Violence. Obviously, I don't condone violence. I don't want to see violence play out on the streets of the UK or any parts of the world. I don't think, obviously, it's not an ideal outcome because I don't want to see people get killed or injured. But I think I really believe that perhaps we're beyond the point of civil discourse and democratic means now. You know, I just get that impression, really. I think when you have a government in power that is so hell bent on carrying out its own ideologies without care in the world for the people that those ideologies are going to have consequences for, you know, you do have to ask yourself, well, how do you get rid of it? You know, how do you fight back against that kind of a system if you can't change anything through voting means? If your local MPs, your councils aren't doing anything, they don't really care anymore. In a country where the councils are asking you to pay more and more and doing less and less every year, where energy bills are going up all the time, where more and more people are ending up in, you know, practically in poverty, where the quality of life is getting worse every year, where people that come into your country illegally seem to have more rights, according to the Home Office, than local Brits do, the indigenous population does, where you're getting taxed out of existence, where you get told that you're not allowed to wave your flags around anymore, where you got told you can't joke about this anymore, can't show these programs anymore. To me, that is pure authoritarianism, and you know, we all know where desperation leads to. You know, how do you think someone like Adolf Hitler came to power? You know, it was born out of a pure desperation, not only because of economic means in Germany at the time, but it was born out of a desire for revenge. It was born out of a desire for change, out of just pure desperation that's for someone to give people hope. And you know, again, I don't want to see someone like that come to power. I don't want to see people becoming scapegoated, because it'll only have massive effects for everybody involved. So you know, I don't want to see some horrific, genuinely horrible, you know, extreme party, whatever it might be, on the left or the right, gain power. But we certainly do need a very strong stance, political stance. We do need a very strong series of solutions to the problems that the UK and obviously America and other parts of Europe and the world, probably Australia, Canada, pretty much practically probably everywhere these days, needs. You know, we need solutions. We need to find ways of making the world better, making the world fairer, making the world more just, but also having a firm grip on things and having a firm line in the sand and saying, you know, this is the point where we're not going to go past this. You know, we're setting boundaries. We're not going to compromise. We're not going to back down. And I think that that's important, to have that assertiveness, to have that confidence to say, you know, this is what we support. This is what we believe is the right thing to do. We're willing to listen to other people's concerns, and we will make changes if we see fit. If we think that there's enough justification for that, then we will make changes. But you know, there comes a point where somebody has to take charge, and somebody has to make some very difficult decisions about things, because otherwise we will have another decade or a few decades of even more extreme, you know, vigilante kind of like ideologues, you know, committing atrocities like we've just seen in America. So, and we'll certainly see a lot more rise of radical Islam across Europe. There's no doubt in my mind about that. So we have to do something. You know, and you know, sometimes when I get up, when I think about my life and I haven't really achieved much, haven't really done much with it. You know, I think, you know, at the very least, I can say that I know that if push came to shove, I would be willing to fight for my own country under the right conditions, under the right leadership. I would be willing to even give my life for my country if I saw that the generations to come would benefit from it, even if it meant struggling in the short term. You know, whether that's a decade, a few years, a few decades, I don't know. But you know, we aren't. I don't think, you know, as a lot of people on YouTube keep saying, and I think there's a lot of truth to it. And I don't want to admit that it's true, but I think it is that we can't vote our way out of this stuff. We've tried to, you know, we've tried to get rid of governments that we felt were incompetent or just outright kind of dismissive of the public's concerns. We tried to sort things out through, well, one of the major issues of the UK out through a referendum that was completely ignored, dismissed, and deliberately corrupted. And so that tells you that the British, the main elites of the British establishment don't care about the public. They don't care about the will of the people. They don't care about democracy. They care about saving their own necks, saving their own parties. They care about money. They care about the wills and aims of giant globalists and their organisations. And that's sometimes why I lose hope. You know, going back to what I said at the absolute start of the video about kind of just not really caring anymore, not really, just kind of feeling like I've given up on life. This is why I feel this way sometimes, because you know, it's like people collectivise, but unless you've got the legal frameworks to change things, you can protest all you want. You know, you can go out there with banners all you want, but unless you have the right system in place that's actually respected, unless you have authorities in place that are actually respected and trusted by the population, unless you have a fair judiciary system, fair politics, you've got nothing. You know, you've got nothing in a society. Society doesn't mean anything at that point, because society is built on the social contract. So society, in many respects, is built on very simple, very basic principles like trust and respect. And when those things decline, everything else does around it. You know, everything collapses, because they're probably two of the most important things that form the basis of human nature, of living around each other, of tolerating each other. You know, we don't all have to agree with each other. We don't all have to be friends. We don't all have to like each other. But we shouldn't be resorting to acts of violence if we can avoid it. And you certainly shouldn't just be killing people just because of something that they said. You know, vandalism's one thing, but then to actually go out there and actually kill somebody is crossing. You know, it's just an unforgivable line that they've crossed. And in my opinion, just like that guy that took that life of that young Ukrainian woman, people like that should face the full extent of the law. And if they can't, then that law system needs to face radical changes, because people like that are a danger to the public, and I believe people like that should be given the death penalty. There's no excuse for things like that. And when people throw out the mental health excuses, justifications, I have mental health problems, but yeah, I don't have an AK-47 or a sniper rifle stuck somewhere in the loft. I'm not going to go out there and saw someone's head off. I'm not going to go out there and kill someone because they have different beliefs. But many people over the years have said things to me that I didn't like, I didn't appreciate. But I never once took a knife to the jugular. You know, bought a gun and went on a rampage. I might not have liked what they said, but they have a right to say whatever they want. You know, granted, they could have said things in a much more respectable way, more mature fashion, but then again, so could have I. So, you know, I could have done the same as well. But my point is that, you know, people just need to grow a spine. They need to grow up, quite frankly. You know, we need to get away from this overly soft, excessively sensitive way of like dealing with other people's opinions and feelings about whatever. Otherwise, we're going to see more and more of these kind of things happening across the Western world. I don't want to give up on life. I don't want to give up on humanity. I think there's still some hope there. I think there's reasons to be at least cautiously optimistic about our species. But there are just some times where you just think to yourself, like, I don't know if there's enough decent people in the world to bring about the changes that we need to make the world better. In any real long-term, true sense of real change, real beneficial, positive change, you know. There are certainly many people trying, but they need support. They have to have the backing. They need to have enough people behind them to help them along, because, you know, and all you do by taking out people like Charlie Kirk, I don't want to keep bringing this up, but, you know, all you do by assassinating people like that is just cause more of a fire in people's hearts and people's heads to continue to fight even harder than they did before. And all you're really doing really is just proving the right. You know, you're proving that not everybody, but a lot of people, sort of, you know, on the sort of more radical side of the left, if you like, are unreasonable, petty, dangerous, uncivilized, psychopaths, basically. And these people need to be taught some serious lessons. That we're not going to tolerate this. We're not going to put up with this. We need to head towards serious deterrence. You know, I don't want to see a society bogged down in bureaucracy and metal detectors everywhere and, you know, the army on the streets and stuff. But do you know what? If that's what it means to have to live in a safe and civilized society, as much as I absolutely hate saying that, you know, if that's the price that you have to pay for it, then bring it on. You know, if it means all public transport has to have metal detectors, AI software that can detect things, that can help prevent certain things from happening, then so be it. And we've already been living with Big Brother for the past few decades anyway. So, you know, what does it really matter if AI is just another step in its evolution of it all? So, I don't know. I guess what I'm saying here is that I have a mixed bag of thoughts and feelings and contradictions and, the world's a kind of very contradictory place. It's a very weirdly, it's just a very, sometimes it can fill you with hope and positivity, and sometimes it can crush you. It can crush your ability to think clearly about things. Not everybody's bad on the left or the right, of course not. There is, I guess, there are still reasons to be hopeful about life, to be hopeful about the future, about the present even. But I think in the end we have to collectivize. We have to somehow work out our differences and come together in some kind of unity of some sort, and say, it's better for us it is better for everybody involved for us to try and have some kind of unification. Because if we don't, we will find ourselves growing more and more deeply divided and hatred of each other, developing hatred of each other. We need peace, man. We need peace. We don't need violence and brutality. We don't need that. History books show us where things lead to, as I've said already. We don't need a repeat of it. I think more people need to smoke a blunt more often. Just chill the fuck out. Just let things be. Just let shit go. Just chill, man. Just fucking chill. We're all going to end up in the same place anyway. I understand people are fiercely supportive of their own viewpoints, as I've said already in the video. But killing someone because of something that you disagree with, that takes a fucking level of ball, man. You want to talk about evil. That is just beyond. I don't know. But what a sad situation. That's all I can say, really. Very, very sad. What can you do in the end? All you can do is just get up and brush yourself down and, just keep going, can't you? That's all you can really do. Just keep going. Try not to give in. And just hope that hope is a real thing, and that hope can lead to something positive. Because by fucking God do we need it.